Okay, hi everybody. So I'll get started with today's demo. We're going to be working in the terminal today with SQLite. Oh, with SQLite 3. SQLite 3 is a tool built on top of SQL, what Shingo just spoke about. It's basically, it allows you to store a database in a file, which is a lot more useful for, I guess, smaller projects. In real life, databases are stored in super large servers, uses the internet, things like that. But here, the databases are stored in a local file. To install SQLite 3, the instructions are in the textbook under chapter 2 databases. So now I'll get started on demo creating a database, showing the favorite BOAs for the Intro to Backend core staff. So to get started off, we'll do SQLite 3. So now we're in SQLite 3. So we're going to start off with creating our table. So create table, and we're going to, create table. We're going to call it user because it's going to store all of our users. What's pretty cool about SQLite 3, it allows you to create multi-line queries. So even though I pressed enter and I'm on a separate line now, the query is not complete until I use a semicolon. So our first field in the query could be our ID. The type of that will be an integer. And as Shingo mentioned, it's our primary key. So all users have their own unique ID, and we're going to use the auto increment primary key so that we're going to use auto increment so that no two users have the same key. And then each field is separated by a comma. Now our next field is going to be the user's name, and that's just going to be the type of that is going to be a text. Text is essentially the equivalent of a string in SQLite 3, and we're going to enforce the condition that the name is not null, because it's pretty important that in this table, we're enforcing that every user has to have has their own name. And then we're going to move on to favorite boba, and then that's also going to be text. And then we're also going to enforce that that's not null, because we're creating a database all about favorite boba. So everyone needs to have their favorite boba in this table. And then lastly, we're going to have favorite topping. And that's going to be of type char20. And this just means char20. That also means it's a... Oh, sorry, favorite topping. Yeah, favorite topping of type char20. And this just means that it's also a string, but it has a limit of 20 characters. And then we're going to close off with a semicolon. And then now we can use the command tables, and we see our table that we just created called user. Moving on to inserting users into our table, we're going to use the insert command. So insert, that's the command, into user, that's our table. And then the parameters name, favorite boba, and then favorite topping. Okay, and then putting in the values. So let's put in myself, Jessica. My favorite boba is, let's go with Thai milk tea. And my favorite topping is bubbles. Okay. And then now we can see that using the select command, select all from select user. We can see that with the first entries in there, ID1, Jessica, my favorite boba Thai milk, and my favorite topping bubbles. So we can repeat this process, entering more entries into our table. So let's go with Shingo. His favorite boba is dirty milk tea, and his favorite topping is also bubbles. And then let's put in, that's just another person. Let's go with Maria. Their favorite boba is baby watermelon. That's a real one from UT. And oh, my bad. Okay. Yeah. Values. Maria, her favorite is baby watermelon. Okay. And let's look at the entries into the table. So as we can see, we have Jessica, Shingo, Maria, Baby Watermelon. Notice how both Jessica and Shingo have 3 entries, the last being bubbles, which is the favorite topping column, but Maria only has name and favorite boba. That's because the favorite topping field was optional, so you wouldn't get a error when you don't include a optional field because it wasn't specified that it couldn't be null. So if we repeat this process and we say, for example, let's add in name, values, Mateo. Okay, arrow stepping, not null, constraint failed. That's because originally when we first defined the table, the favorite boba field was added the precondition not null. So moving on, let's try collecting different information from our table. So we already saw the select all feature, so it selects all users from our table. We can also select specific users. So let's select name from user, and this returns all of the names in the table. We can do multiple parameters at multiple fields at once. So let's do name, favorite, boba, user, and that returns both the name and the field favorite boba. You can see here, if you try to select from a field that doesn't exist, so for example, you have like favorite sugar level, user, error, no such column, favorite sugar level. So you can both only insert and select from columns in the table that exist. So say we have there's a new trend, and then all of a sudden everyone likes golden bubbles instead of regular bubbles. So let's try update from the table. So let's try update user set. Now we're going to set our favorite topping to now be golden bubbles instead. I only want to change my entry. I like golden bubbles. Everyone wants to stay the same. So my ID equals 1. And then let's select all and see if it updated. And here we see we have Jessica, Thai milk. Now it's golden bubbles instead of just regular bubbles. And so now say I have a bad experience with the golden bubbles and I hate boba now and I want to delete my entry from the table. We can also delete from user where ID equals 1. That's my ID. And then let's select all from the table to see. And now Jessica's gone. Now it's just Shungo and Maria. And then finally, say I convince everyone boba's awful. I want to delete the entire table. We don't need boba's banned from app dev now. So now we can try delete the entire table. So we're just going to drop table user. And then let's check our tables. And it's gone. And now we're finished. And then we want to leave the shell. It's just simply .exit. Oh, oops. And that's it. We're back to a regular terminal. Does anybody have any questions? No? Okay.
Okay, so that's kind of an overview of SQL. Thank you, Jessica, for showing that. I guess we're much more ahead of schedule than anticipated, so we can just get started with the demo code. So just quickly, if y'all are not really familiar with this, the way Jessica was going through previous commands really, really quickly, which all of you should use, is by hitting the up arrow. So this will kind of scroll you through all the commands that you've run in the past. Hitting down will, go more forward, and up is more backward. But that's just oh, oops, sorry. That's just a slight thing to know. when going through the commands that you've run in the past. Okay, is SQL actually comfortable with everyone? Like, is everyone comfortable with SQL? That makes sense. It's very fun, very lots of text, but much more usable than Python dictionaries, I hope. So with the same commands that we ran last time, right? I'm going to be doing this we're both going to be doing this every single week. Code dot to open the current directory. Let's start looking at what is in our demo2 directory. So, right, we have basically a very similar thing as last week. We're not going to be, typing all this up again because all of you are probably familiar with it already. So we have a few endpoints, right? We have the base endpoint, the task endpoint, the create task endpoint, get task, update task, delete task. So all this is basically the same as what we did last time, minus the dictionary that we had for posts, right? So that's app.py. db.py, on the other hand, is a bit different and going to be a bit new. So let's discuss about what's in db.py. Okay, so we have OS. OS is your operating system. That's your computer. We're going to be using OS to, actually, I'm not really sure where we use OS, but OS is stuff that's going to be in your operating system on your local computer. So whether that be like files or something like environment variables, which we'll cover later. That's what this package is for. SQLite 3 is the library we're going to be using to write SQL in, right? So same thing as what Jessica just showed. So that's what these two packages are. This singleton function, you can actually go ahead and click this link if you hit Command click on Mac or Control click on Windows, I think. But basically what it does is we have a database driver. The database driver is an object that like kind of represents the whole database, right? And we only ever want one instance of it running because we don't want to be adding data to it from like two separate like ends. We only want one database instance to be running at the same time. So that's what the singleton function does. Singleton allows you to only get one instance of a class ever. And so you can see down here that we have a database driver that we pass in through the singleton function so that only one connection to the database exists at one time, at any given time. Cool. And this database driver thing is something we're going to be writing code under. This is actually where we're going to be writing the SQL code. It's under the database driver because this is the class that interacts with the database, right? That's the whole point of it. So yeah, and there's like comments here to kind of like run you through what's going on here. Okay. So any questions so far with what the file setup is here? Does everything make sense? Only one connection to the database at a time. Okay. So we're going to be starting with the database file because the database file is going to define our table, define our how we're going to be interacting with the table. And one important thing that I forgot to mention last semester is when you're creating a backend, you generally always want to start with the table design before the API design, before designing the routes. And that's because you want to have a foundation of like what your data is how your data is structured before you actually start implementing the logic on how to actually interact with it, right? So we're going to be designing the database by first defining what the table is going to look like first. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Today we'll probably cover how to get connected with the database and then just stop it there. And then next lecture, Jessica will cover how to use the SQL functions to interact with the database. Right, so let's find out how to connect with the database first. So the way we're going to do that is by actually defining this init function. For those of you familiar with Python, init is like kind of like how to initialize this database object or database driver class. So if we define or if we initialize an object of this class, this function is going to run. So to initialize it, let's first write documentation on what this does. Here is a connection with the database. Stores the instance variable. All right, so again, this is going to connect to the database. And also, why is my Wi-Fi doing this? Okay, so it's going to connect it to, we're going to connect to the database and store the connection into a variable called cont for connection. Right, so let's do that. So the way we're going to define instance variables in Python is by doing self dot and then the variable name. So self.cont equals SQLite3 dot connect. And so there's going to be two fields we can enter here. The first one is the name of the database file. The app we're going to be showing how to create in demo is a to-do app. So we're just going to call it to-do.db. And this .db is going to be the file type of every database file you create in SQLite 3. So we connected to this to-do.db file, and we're also going to do same or check same thread equals false. This prevents us from making multiple edits to the database at the same time. There's actually benefits of setting this as true, but that's a kind of outside the scope of this course, so we're not going to discuss it. Okay. Does that make sense so far? We just connected to the database, right? So when we connect to the database, what is the first thing we want to do? Let's think about it. So, right, we have this empty database file, and we want to actually start using it for our app, right? The first thing you would probably do is actually create the tables we're going to be using. So we'll do self, which is a function within this database driver class, self.create task table. Okay, and I'll end it right here. But next time, Jessica will cover how to actually create the task table, right? This is a function we're calling from the initialize function. So every time we initialize this object, it's just going to immediately get called, and it'll create a table. And then she'll also cover functions to actually interact with the database. So like retrieving tasks, inserting tasks, updating and deleting tasks. So yes.
All right, hi everybody. We're gonna get started with demo 2, databases. So as Shingo mentioned at the end of Monday's lecture, we're working with 2 files, our database file, which we create the functions that deals with the database directly, and our app.py file, which deals with our routes. So starting off, we're using SQLite 3 to create our database. And we're using something called a database driver, which handles the reading and writing data with the database. So to start off, we're going to start with initializing our database, which, oh, you did this last lecture, my bad. Okay, you already created the connection, you have the name of your database, and check same thread equals false. Is everybody on the same page? And then in this function, when we initialize it, we're going to call the function self.create task table. So now we're going to define that function. So def create task table. So create task table, and that is going to take in self. So in this function, we're going to call using our cont variable. So self.cont. Self.cont is going to use this function called execute. And then we're going to create our task table. So from Monday's demo, does anybody remember how we create tables using SQL? The function in SQL that we use to SQLite 3 to make a table? Okay, so we're gonna start off with the a string, because our execute function takes in a string as a parameter. So it's gonna be create table, and then we're gonna call, oh, sorry. Yeah, so create table, and then we're gonna call, oh my gosh, we're gonna call our table task, and then that's gonna have taking some fields. So the first one is gonna be ID, type is gonna be integer. The ID is gonna be our primary key, so that each task has its own unique ID, and then it's gonna use the auto increment feature, and And then the next. Yeah. Okay, so oops, this should be in parentheses. Okay, so oh my gosh. Okay. Okay, so quickly. So ID, integer, primary key. To increment. And then our next field is going to be description. And that's going to be of type text, not null, because every task needs its own description. And then the last one is going to be done, which is going to be a Boolean, also not null. So just to reiterate, in SQL queries, you're going to have a comma after each field, except for the last one. And then every command ends with a semicolon, and then the execute function takes in the parameter as a string. So all of this is going to be a string that's sent into our function, right? So then moving on to our next function, we're going to just for good practice, just so you know, you're not gonna be using this, but we're gonna create our function to delete our task table if necessary. So defining delete task table that also takes in self. And then does anybody remember the SQL function that to delete a table? Yes. Pardon?
Oh, delete the whole entire.
Yeah, delete the entire table. Almost, yes. Yeah, exactly. So it's gonna be self.con.execute. And then that's gonna take in a string again, and it's gonna be delete. Sorry. It's gonna be drop table if exists. And then our table is called task. And then every query, every function ends with a semicolon. And then I'm just realizing I should put documentation. So quickly, the create task table function using SQL, it creates a task table. And then our delete task table, it's going to be documentation using SQL. It's going to delete the task table. Okay, great. So right now we have three functions set up: the initialization, creating the task table, and then deleting the last table. And then all of this is through our database. Does anybody have any questions thus far? Okay. Okay, so moving on, we're going to define another function called get all tasks. So def get all tasks, and this is going to, it takes in self, and this is going to, using SQL, returns all the tasks in a table. So does anybody remember the SQL syntax to select all of the information from the database? Yes. Yeah, exactly. So again, it's going to be self.con.execute. And that's going to also take in a string. Oh, okay. Didn't have to be like that. It's going to take in a string, select star from tasks. Yeah, select star from task. And then what do you guys think this is going to return? Because right now this is a function, but right now it's not storing the information anywhere, and it needs to be stored into a variable. So let's call that variable cursor. And just to quickly explain why we're using the word cursor, comparing our database to an Excel spreadsheet. Oh, yeah. Yeah, comparing our database to Excel spreadsheet. Oh, thank you. Yes, sorry, this is Singo's computer, not mine. Comparing our table to an Excel spreadsheet, the same way how you select everything using the cursor, So it's going to, the output of self.conduct execute select star from table, it's going to be a 2D array containing all that information. So the reason why we save it as cursor is because it's going to be something like that. Unfortunately, this is not something that Python can understand. So we're gonna we're gonna put it into I guess a more readable terms for Python. So we're gonna have our empty task list, and then from it's looking back at the spreadsheet consists of a bunch of rows. So each row representing one item in our database. So we're gonna loop through our rows and then append that into our task list, and then return that task list so Python can understand that. So for row in cursor, so row is each individual item in the task list, and then cursor is our entire database basically. We're gonna append to our empty task list a object, which that being a Python dictionary having an ID, and then in our database, what corresponds to the ID, or which item in like row would correspond to the ID. The first one, right? Yeah. So that's going to be row at position 0. And then moving on, we're going to have our description, and that is going to be description. That is going to be row at position 1. And then lastly, we have done, and that is going to be row at position 2. And then we are going to return our tasks. Return tasks. So does anybody have any questions thus far? Everyone on the same page? All right, everybody's ready? All right, so moving on to our app.py. So the work that we just did in the database was just like setting up the database itself. And now we're going to use app.py to create routes to fetch the information from that database. So starting off, we need Flask, so we're importing Flask and request. We also need to import our database file. And then we also need to import JSON. So now we're going to instantiate our database driver to actually to utilize those database operations that we're going to use. So firstly, we're going to name our database equals db.database driver. So all this is doing is basically just creating the database driver so that we can now use the functions that we implemented in our database file, right? So starting off with, we're going to implement our get tasks function. So this is going to be our endpoint for getting all tasks. And that's simply just returning the information from the JSON. So it's going to be JSON jumps our tasks. And that's going to be, we're going to now call our get all task functions that we instantiated in our database file. So it's going to be db.get all. So this should be get all tasks, and we're going to call db.get all tasks. And that is then going to return the list of the task objects that we just created. And then that is going to have a status code of 200. Does anybody have any questions again? Okay, so moving on to, let's test our code now that we set up. So we're in our src folder. We're going to create our virtual environment. So Python 3-m then. Okay, great. So now our virtual environment is created. We can see that up here. And then we're going to activate our virtual environment. So that's .venv /bin/activate. You guys should know this from the first assignment.
Yeah, exactly.
What's actually on this? I don't know what it looks like. Okay, all right, awesome. And now we're gonna start our terminal. So that's just Python 3 app.py. Okay, so sorry, one last step. We're gonna install our requirements. So that's why we're getting the error no module Flask, because Flask, the version of Flask comes from our when we pip install requirements.txt. So let's do that quickly now. So install -r requirements.txt. Okay, awesome. So everything should be installed now. Oh, okay. So, task. Okay, so let me quickly, but the error I'm getting is that the task table already exists. So let me just quickly delete that first, because it's like, I'll do this by before I create it. So delete task table. Okay. Save. Okay, awesome. Our server is running. So let's move on to Postman, and then let's create a new collection. And let's call this demo2. Oh, yeah, let's call this demo2. And then let's start off with our first request. Let's call it get all tasks, and it's going to be a get request. And then our URL, also something very important to note, in the end of app.py, it has, we should have changed it from last time, but it's port 5000. We should change it to port 8000. So that's something to note. It should be at the end of your app.py, app run host, etc., etc. The host is the same, but the port should be 8000, not 5000. Okay, awesome. So now we are going to put in our request URL. So http :/0.0.0.08000, and then slash, and then our route is going to be tasks. Yeah, tasks. Okay, awesome. So yeah. How is it not? Okay, our server is running. Okay, this is. Oh, right. Okay. Let's restart the server since we changed the host. Okay. Oh. Okay. Okay, 8000. Okay. Let me just like restart it again. Okay. Now. Okay, awesome. So our get request, get all tasks, it's gonna be an empty list because we haven't put anything in there as yet. So let's do that now. So now we're gonna go back to our database file, and then we're gonna define our get create task function. So let's define the function insert into the table. And does anybody can anybody tell me the SQL query to insert something into a table that already exists? Yes.
Insert into.
Yes, exactly. So let's define our function. So define insert task table, and then that is going to take in self, and then the information for the task is going to be description and done. So let's work our documentation. So using SQL inserts a task into the task table, and then we are going to do self.con.execute, and we're going to do as a string insert into task, and then we're going to have our parameters. So that's going to be description and done. And here's something new. We're going to have, when you put in your values, you're going to have a placeholder, and it's going to be a tuple of question marks for the same with the same number of parameters you're putting in. So here we have description and done. So now we're going to have a tuple of 2 question marks, and then that ends our SQL query. And then after a query, we're going to send in these 2 parameters of pair into our query. So then we're going to put in description and done. So essentially the 2 question marks essentially these are parameters and they're going to be sent into the query in place of the question marks. So it's insert into task, our table, 2 parameters, description and done, and then these values will be sent in here. So we're changing our table. So now we have to do something called self.con.commit. So think of this as like, you know, in GitHub, you like commit a file, you save something. This is how we save changes that we make to our table, self.con.commit. We didn't have to do that in the past because we were only just getting information. So getting a task, creating the table, etc. But here we're making an active change to the table. So we have to commit. So now we've done the work on the database side. So now let's go implement this as a root. So let me give you guys some time to. Yes.
Is there any reason for the stuff.com when we do create table there's 3 quotations on each side?
Where the
Or when we do like box strings?
oh, like at when you just like when you create table like a 3?
No, for in the def create as a table.
Oh, like here?
Yeah.
Oh, that's because it's a multi-line query. They're both strings. So here, three quotes, like 3 and then 3, that represents a doc string, and that's used for bigger strings. But here, since this SQL query is a little bit simpler, it's just 1 quote. So either is fine. So you sending in the information to the execute function as a doc string or a regular string, both are fine. Just I did this as a doc string because it was like a very, very long function and it was easier to break up that way. Very good question. So now we have our insert task table. We're inserting a new task into our table. So then now let's implement this on the app.py side. So our function is going to be, we're going to have a getter body equals JSON dot loads request dot data. So from our request, we're basically loading our data and saving that into our body variable. And then we need to get our description for that task. So it's going to be body.get description. This should be familiar from the first assignment. And then we're going to get, since we're just creating a task, we have to do that. Okay. And then, okay. So here, something we need to keep in mind is that we need to get our task ID from somewhere, and we haven't done any work to do that. So let's go back to our database and create our function called getTaskById. So essentially, after you insert a task into the table, you need to have a way of getting the ID. So, okay. Oh, my bad. Okay, to be fair, I left out one part. When you're inserting a task into the table, you need to return the ID of the task that you just created. So here, we're inserting the task into the table using the SQL query. Here, we're saving the information using self.con.commit. And there's one last thing we need to do. It's return the ID somehow. So what we're going to do is that we're going to save this variable. We're going to save this information when you're creating the task into the variable cursor, because it's the same thing, a 2D array like the Excel spreadsheet I showed you earlier. And then the cursor variable has this like field called last row ID. Because remember how each task in your table is going to be a row. So when you insert a task into your table, the last row is going to be the task that you just created. So since we want to return the ID of the task that we just created, we're going to return cursor.lastRowID. So that's how when you insert a task into the table, you're then able to access the ID of the task that you just created. So then now, having implemented that, we're going to implement another function called getTaskById, and that's going to take in self and the ID of the task that we want to fetch. So writing our documentation using SQL gets a task by its ID. So this function, we're going to do, does anybody remember how to select basically get information from a table using an SQL function? Like get something specific from the table. Because remember how we spoke about like select star from table and that returns everything? Yes? Yeah, exactly. So we're going to do a query called self.con.execute, and then we're going to select, oops, okay. Oh. Yeah, okay, my bad. Okay, so it's going to be select star from task where ID equals a question mark. And then we're going to then send in question mark as a tuple as we did earlier. So it's going to be like this. And then after our query is over, we're going to send it in. Something to note that even though earlier we had several values being sent in, so we had description, comma, done, makes sense. There are two values in the tuple, so we're going to need a comma to separate them. Something to note here, even though we only have one parameter ID, we still need to put a comma after, even though nothing comes after it, because that's the correct way to represent a tuple. And you can think of a tuple kind of like a list or an array, but the main difference is that a tuple, you can't change the size and it's represented as like within like parentheses. Something very important to note that you need a comma after the ID. Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay, so that's that. Okay. Oh, okay, I was wondering. Okay, so okay, yeah. So now we have our function to our SQL query to get a specific task from the table where ID is the ID that was sent in. So now how do we actually get the ID from this task? To get the task from this ID, we're going to label this cursor again, because again, it returns that 2D array of information. And now we're going to put it into a format that Python understands. So again, even though it's one item, we're still just going to do for row in cursor. So even though it's like the cursor is basically just going to be like one singular row, we're then going to return and then put this into a format that Python can understand. So it's going to be a dictionary with ID. The value of ID in our row is going to be at position 1, and then our description is going to be at position 2. So it's essentially the same thing for get all tasks, just like for one value. So row at position 2, and then done. Oops. Okay. Row at position 3. Okay. So then now if an actual task is returned, this should return immediately. So then if that fails, then we're just going to return none. Because this is only returned if like something goes wrong, somehow you can't, there's no ID there's no task existing with that ID, you're going to return none if nothing exists, right? So now having implemented that, we're going to go back to our app.py and finish our create task route. So we have our body, we have our description. Now we're going to, oh, where is it? Now we're going to create our task ID. Set our task ID to be db.create task sorry, not db create task. It's going to be db.insert task table, because what we're doing here, we're inserting the task that we're going to make into our task table in our database. So we're calling the function db insert task table, and then we're going to send in the description we just retrieved from the request data. And then since it's a to-do list with a list of tasks, we're going to assume that when you first make the task, the done is going to be initially be false. Oh, it's going to be initially false. So this is our description that we're sending in. This is our false. And then we're going to then retrieve that task back from our database. So what we're doing here in line 26, we're inserting that task into the table. And now in line 27, we're going to then get back that task to make sure that we that it worked correctly. So then we're going to say if task is none, aka it was like unsuccessful in creating that task into the table, then we're going to return our failure message, which is json.dumps. It's going to be an error, and the contents, it's just going to be basically, since we know that like something went wrong with creating the task. So something went wrong because we create the task here and then we immediately get it back. So if we now get an error, like if the task is none, we know something went wrong when creating the task. So we're going to put that error. Let me give you guys more space. Creating the task, and then it's going to be an error code of 400. And then else, if task is not none, we're just going to return that task. So json.dumps, we're going to return our task. And then we have a success code of 200. So, sorry, 201. Okay. So here we have in create tasks, we get our body description, we insert into the task table, we get the task back. If the task is none, we have our error. Else, we just return the task and an error code of 200, success code of 201. So now let's test that in Postman. So now let's create another request. So same request URL. And then let's name this create new task. And then into our body, we're going to oh, yours is different from mine. Oh, yeah. Okay. In our body, and then it's going to be a JSON. So it's just going to be, it takes in a description, and then let's say my first task is to give demo 2. So okay, both are saved. All right. Okay. Oh. Oh. Okay. Okay. Oh, it is. Oh, okay. Slice must be integers or slice and not tuple. Oh, okay, I got it. 979 db. Okay, my bad. All right. Let's try this again. But not send request. Oh. Oh, my bad. Okay. Okay. Oh. My fault. Okay. Let's try this again. Okay, server's going. Let's see. All right, awesome. So now we have our task created, ID 1, our description, and the default done status is false. You might see that it's a 0. That's just it. Python converts it false to 0 and then true to a 1. So think of it like basically every true is a 1, every false is a 0. They're the same thing. So then moving on to okay. Oh, okay. Moving on to updating our tasks. So say you actually, let me put a couple more tasks into the table. So let's say upload demo 1. And then I entered a new task into the table, and then the ID is now 2. And then I'll go homework due tonight. So let me just say submit. I'll go homework. Okay. So, and now ID of 3. Oh, okay. All right. So now we're gonna say like we complete a task in our table and then we want to update that task. We're now going to create a function in our database to allow us to do that. So let's define def update task, and that's going to take in self and the ID of that task. So using SQL updates a task in our table. So does anybody know the function, the SQL query that we can use to update a task in our table? And, oh, yes.
Just update.
It's gonna be update task, and then, all right, so let's go through it now. So self, again, self.con.execute. We're going to, okay, this is gonna be a little bigger, so I'm gonna now use the doc string. It should be the same though, like it's the same thing. So we're gonna update task, so our table, and then we're gonna set our description equals a question mark. Ooh, okay. Done is also equal a question mark. And then we're gonna do this where ID, given our ID equals another question mark. And then we're going to then send all this information in as a tuple after the string. So that's just gonna be description, done, and ID. So note how you, oh, did I spell it wrong? Yeah, description.
You didn't put in the update function, update function.
Hmm?
Line 83.
Yeah. Oh, my bad. Okay. So yeah, so it's going to be, my bad. It's going to be sending in that new information. So it's going to be description, done, ID, and then we're going to send that information in. So we're updating the task, setting the description, setting the done, where the ID is equal to that. And then after that, we're making changes to our database. So again, we have to commit. So again, think of committing like saving your database. So self.con.commit, and then that's it. So let's go back to our app.py file and implement this route. So it's, oh, oops. All right. So again, we're going to get the information from our JSON request and then call that function that we just created. So writing the doc string, it's going to be the endpoint for updating a task. And then we're going to get our information from our body. So it's going to be body equals the same JSON.dumps request data. And then we're going to get our description equals body.description. And then you guys know the drill, same. Okay, so now we have information that we want to update. So we're then going to, we're then going to update, we're going to call the function that we just created in our database. So db update task. Oh, this should be update task by ID. So we're going to call the function we just created, update task by ID. And then we're going to, first we need to fetch our task ID using the function db.getTaskById, and then we're going to send in the task ID, the description, and done. And then we now have our task ID, and then we're going to update that. And now we're going to send in our description, done, and our task ID. So just to go over that quickly, we're essentially gonna get our task. Oh, yeah, we're gonna wait. Hold on. Oh, my bad. Okay, I did the wrong thing. Sorry. Oof. Okay. We're gonna get them from our body. We're gonna get the description, get our done. We're gonna update our task by ID. Then we're gonna get that task that we just created. So it's gonna be task equals database.getTaskById using that task ID and that description and done. So after that, we now have our task. So if task is none, we want to return a failure response. So it's going to be return our error. And that's just going to be task not found. So, let me give you guys more space. So task not found. And then else we're just going to return that task we just got back. So that's just going to be return. Oh, sorry. This should be JSON dumps. JSON.dumps. And then this is also JSON dot dumps, and that's just going to be our task and a success code of 200. And this has a failure code of 404 because task not found. Okay, so we then just wrote the route for updating a task. Let's test this on Postman. So let's create a new request. So add request, updating a task, and then same. Well, similar URL, except here this takes in a ID. So let's say I want to say I finished my algo homework and I want to actually submit it. That had a what's it called? An ID of 3. So body raw JSON. So I'm updating the task with ID of 3 to description. Submit. Ooh. Submit algo homework and done. I actually finished it. So I want to set that to true. Okay. Let's see. Did I save it? Oh, I did not. Okay. Oh, right. Okay, so oops. Okay, let's see. All right. Okay. What's going on? All right.
JSON.loads.
Oh my God. All right, sorry guys. JSON.loads. We're getting information. Yes. Okay. Oh, get task by ID.
You just pass an ID, right?
Oh yeah. Okay, my bad.
You pass it all 3 of them.
Okay, so it's just task ID. All right. Okay. Error, task not found. Oh, did I not? This is weird. Okay. Yeah, this is strange. Oh. Yeah. Okay, let me just create it again. And then let me just update the task that I just created. So it went from, oh, okay, so it went from description, submit algo homework, done is 0. So now let's update that to done to being true. So then now it's ID 1, description, submit algo homework, done is 1. We submitted the algo homework, it's now done is true. Okay, and then our last task is going to be deleting a task. So let's first do that in our database.py. So def delete task from delete task by ID. And that's going to take in self, and that's going to take in the ID of the task you then want to delete. So using SQL deletes a task from a table. All right, and then again, does anybody remember how to delete a specific task from a database? Yes? Yeah, exactly. So it's going to be just delete from task where ID is the given ID. So again, self.con.execute. We're going to send in delete from task where ID equals a question mark. And then we're going to send in that ID as a parameter. And again, it's going to be, you're going to have a comma after ID, even though it's just 1, because you have to remember it is a tuple. So, and then since we were making changes to our database, we then want to do, let me move this over. We would then want to do self.con.commit again. Okay, so we have our SQL query and then we commit that. And then setting up the route for what we just did, it's going to be, does anybody, actually, yeah. All right, so it's going to be, the documentation is just setting up the endpoint for deleting a task from a database. Okay, awesome. And then it's just going to be, you're going to fetch our task and then call the delete function and then return our failure or success response. So it's gonna be task equals get task. Yeah, DB from our database, DB get task by ID. And then we're gonna send in our task ID. And then we're going to get back a task. If that task is none, then we're going to, the task is none. We want to then give a failure response because there's nothing to delete, so task is not found. So return json.dumps our error. Yeah, our error. That's just going to be task not found. Let me move this over, give you guys more space to see. So task not found. Else we want to return. We're then gonna, so if the task is none, there's nothing to delete, we have our task not found, then we're actually going to delete the given task from our database. So it's gonna be delete, we're gonna call the function we just created, delete task by ID, sending in our given task ID, and then we're, so we're gonna send that in as a dictionary, and then it's gonna be error code 404, and then if the task is not none, then we're going to delete it from our database and then return our task and say like as like a success response. So return json.dumps. We're going to return our task and then we're going to return our task and then a success code. So we went through a lot. Does anybody have any questions thus far? Okay, cool. So now let's just test the route we just implemented. So we're going to add another request. Oh, I should save these. Okay. Oops. Save. Okay, save. All right, awesome. So now we're going to test out the route we just implemented. So delete task. That is going to be a delete request. And then it's going to be a very similar route. Let me add a couple more tasks into the table so you can see it when I delete it. So other tasks, okay, I need to eat dinner. I need to, okay, the server stopped, my bad. Okay, line 64, all right. Indentation. Okay, expected indentation block, indented block, okay. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. All right. Okay, awesome. Server's going. Let's try this again, putting in a couple more into our tables. All right, we have eat dinner. I need to also do my Spanish homework. And then let's see that, get all tasks. Okay, we have all our tasks in the table. Oh, okay. So then say I want to just delete my Spanish homework. I'm tired of Spanish. So then let's copy our route. And then the ID of the task I want to delete Spanish homework is 2. So let me just delete that task. And then I have a success. That's the response for the task that I just deleted. And then when I get all tasks, originally it had 2 tasks, eat dinner, do Spanish homework. When I get it again, it's now only eat dinner. So it was the task, do my Spanish homework, was successfully deleted from the database. So that pretty much covers all the content for demo today. Does anybody have any questions before we get into the Kahoot? Okay, awesome. Let's start the Kahoot. I don't know.
That's it.